Hello, hello, hello,
You are audible, sir.
Abhish.
You
Hello.
are
On
audible,
India,
sir.
I'm audible.
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay. So all other participants have joined. On India, shall I start?
Yes, sir. You start, sir.
Uh,
Sir.
okay, I start now. Uh, Hello and good morning to all of you. I extend a very warm welcome to all the participants and speakers in the inaugural session of the three-day National Web Conference on contemporary trends in English in literature being organized by the teachers of English of Munger University, Munger. Our university has the proud privilege to get the consent and acceptance of a beautiful galaxy of eminent speakers from across the country to share their views on the emerging trends in contemporary literature. In the panel of our web conference, we have distinguished speakers like Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh, Emeritus Professor and former Fulbright Fellow, University of Washington, uh, from Agra, UP. Uh, we have Professor I.D. Tiwari from IKS University, Chhattisgarh, Professor Sanjukta Das Gupta from the University of Calcutta, Professor H. Kalpana from Pondicherry University, Professor Madhu Smita Pati from RD Women's University, Bhubaneswar, Professor Anne Jacob from Delhi University, Professor uh, Niladri Ranjan Chatterjee from Kalyani University, West Bengal, and Professor UK Mishra from TMBU, Bhagalpur. I feel humbled and overwhelmed by their kind gesture to be a comrade in the noble enterprise of our knowledge sharing. As we know, literature is a sweet and delightful expression of human thought, experience, and imagination, growing and evolving by blending tradition and experiment and incorporating new diction and form. That is why it is never stale and ever relevant. That is why we need to assess and keep track of the changes in literature with the changes in social reality. We know that in the last few decades, the world has changed and witnessed landslide transformations in respect of the end of colonialism, the hangover of colonialism in post colonial societies, life changing intervention of ICT and virtual technology, economic and social changes, socio-political changes ushered in by globalization, the unprecedented emergence of the marginalized and the subaltern, and a confusing crisscross of literary theories. The question of women, Dalits, black people, the colonized, the proletariat, the LGBT, the minorities, the migrants and immigrants, the regional identity and diaspora, etc., have assumed center stage. The questions of identity, history, and ecology have become more and more significant. The problems of marginalization and isolation have become very important, and literature has become a voice from the margin and a reflection of social trauma. Recently, literature is trying to come to terms with the ideas of post-truth and hyperreality and virtual reality. Consequently, new vistas are being opened uh, in the field of literature, such as blogging, flash fiction, myth fiction, alternate history, etc. Themes such as digital humanity are being negotiated with. This conference is an attempt to discuss the changes that have crept into the form and content of literature vis-à-vis the recent developments in the world and the new strategies that are being devised by literary artists and literary theorists to address the new developments. It is hoped that the erudition and experience of the distinguished speakers in the conference will give a new insight and approach to assess the prospects the new social developments. On this occasion, I feel honored and obliged to welcome Professor Ranjit Kumar Verma, founder Vice Chancellor of the University of Munger, as the chairperson of the inaugural session of the conference. Professor Verma is an eminent scientist, an able administrator, and a person of impeccable integrity. He is known for his innovative approach and an encyclopedic command on matters of almost every issue of social and cultural relevance. I request our Vice Chancellor, on behalf of the teachers of Munger University, to welcome our distinguished guests and share his views. Over to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Ranjit Verma, sir. Sir, your mic is off.
I think I
Yes,
am
sir.
reaching you now.
Yeah, yeah, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Bhavesh Pandey, for giving me this proud privilege of welcoming all the guests. It is really very exciting that the English teachers of Munger University have been have decided to hold this national web conference, and today they are getting it inaugurated on the first day of the 3-day event. On behalf of Munger University, I welcome Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh, Professor I.D. Tiwari, Dr. Sanjukta Das Gupta, Dr. S. Kalpana, Dr. Madhu Smita, Dr. Nilandri, Dr. U.K. Misra, Munger University teachers, Tausif, Mohsin, all the participants. I welcome you on behalf of the university. Before I express my views, let me tell about my feeling about what I think of the responsibility of literature. The topic has been well chosen, contemporary trends in literature. But before going to the contemporary trends, I think we should give some introspection, and we should also think about the ways or think about the responsibilities of the persons who are involved in this, on the creation and the propagation of literature. You are perfectly right in telling that literature gives an opportunity to communicate, to express ourselves. That's right. But while we are communicating between the source of knowledge to the different targets in the society, the generation of knowledge always depends on the modes of propagation of knowledge. And for the propagation, literature has a very important or the most crucial role to play. But while propagating the knowledge, propagating the whatever knowledge has been created or whatever knowledge has been generated at one point in the society, we have to think what to propagate and what not to propagate. I am not talking about marginalization in a big way or isolation in a big way, or I am not appealing you to put to highlight social trauma. I will give one example, what I think. I remember somewhere I had read, I have this impression, I may be wrong. I'm remembering Vladimir Nabokov, the author of Lolita, the Russian-American novelist, and lot of literature was generated at that time, rather glorifying the trend, which was actually leading to aberration and distortion, not only in the social values, but also in the literature. We started justifying the openness, which was a result of the mindset of the author, with due respect of the great novelist Vladimir, but because he was from a broken society, all the social inhibitions were kept aside, and then he wrote something, and that started a trend in the literature. I will give one more example. There was a leading periodical, English periodical of our country, the Illustrated Weekly of India. The trend changed with the arrival of Kushwan Singh. The type of items, the type of things that were literature that was being generated, and Kushwan Singh became role model. I'm not criticizing Kushwan Singh that way, but I remember Illustrated Weekly got more circulation, and the target group that it aimed changed. Later on, when the publication, the edit, Pritish Nandi became the editor, the type of items, the type of literature that started coming up in that journal took that journal out of the shelves of the so-called elite of the society, who were rather regular readers of that journal, that periodical. And later, that target group, which was liking aberrations, distortions, absurdity, vulgarity, they again slipped away when some other more absurd and vulgar magazines came to the society. And result, we know what happened to Illustrated Weekly. There may be other reasons, advent of computer, so many things within that publication group. I put a scientific approach here. I think all of us are aware of the test of capsaicin, the chemical compound, the chemical antibiotic present in the red chilies that adds taste to our food. That's good. But what is happening? Persons who are not having, who are not taking that sort of food are getting good saliva secreted within their from their inner cheeks. But capsaicin, the inflammatory agent in the chili, the main compound, irritating compound in that food, causes inflammation on our salivary gland, and that results in more secretion and more saliva comes, and then we have convenience of mixing our food that is in our mouth, and then the blood circulation also increases, and then we have some freshness also, and we get taste because the digestion process starts in the mouth itself. While we mixing, we chew the food. What happens? Here lies the point that I want to make before you. If we put inflammatory agent, we expose the tissues to inflammatory agent, there is normal scientific changes which we can call threshold point of inflammation. Unless we get that threshold point of inflammation, we won't get our saliva excreted to the desired quantity. And then we are habitual taker of that inflammatory agent. Leave capsaicin, it is a good antibiotic. We should take in our food. It is antibacterial also. I am coming to tobacco. What happens? We put tobacco here in our mouth on the mucosa membrane, from where the mucus is generated. The inflammation, the inflammatory effect of tobacco causes enhancement or raising the threshold point of inflammation. Unless we are exposed, or the tissues are exposed to that inflammatory, that point, threshold point, the normal functioning of excretion will not be there. In the same way, if we expose our audience to particular aberration, to particular distortion in values, in thinking, in absurdity, in fallacy, in vulgarity, what happens? There are certain chemicals in our brain which are released and result in a particular way of thinking, and that guides our behavior. There are many supporting glands which generate hormones, and those hormones control our enzymes, the entire system, biological system within us. So what happens? If we are habitual, we are exposed to some sort of inflammation, maybe in form of food, or maybe in form of inflammation in form of thoughts, we shall not enjoy anything which is not inflammatory, which has no aberration, which has no absurdity, which has no vulgarity, and so on and so forth. So to me, as a student of science, I think it is the responsibility of the persons who are analyzing literature, who are generating literature, who are monitoring literature, and applying different techniques of propagation, should also be aware that unintentionally, unknowingly, no glorification of the wrong things in the society is there. Because wrong glorifications of wrong persons, wrong works lead to different lead to aberrations in formation of the creation of the role models in the society, and that decides that determines the direction that we which we give to the society. So this is my way of thinking. I may be wrong, because literature, whoever is involved in creation of literature, preservation of literature, modification of literature, should be cautious about these deviations and these changes which are there. One more point, the fallacious, a term comes in in deductive logic, that while making an inference, we often tend to derive wrong conclusion, wrong generalization, using fallacy of 4 terms. I think in all the literature, we should be careful about it. With these things, I think the role of the persons who are either creating literature, or who are glorifying literature, or who are giving direction to the society, I think their role is very crucial, very important for the society. With these words, I don't mean any, I don't think that I should say that we should not consider all these things, but we should be cautious about these sort of aberrations, but I feel they are taking place. Second, the fourth thing, whether the changes in language, whether the changes in phonetics, whether the changes in literature, should we accept it? Should we adopt a lenient view to changes in the standard form of the literature? I think flexibility has its own importance, but even then, there should always be a standard line which should be important in literature. But it should not be so strict that literature is not accepted by the society. The communication, the acceptance by the society should also be kept in mind. With these words, I again congratulate you, Dr. Bhavesh Pandey, and your entire team for organizing such a good event. I wish it a grand success, and I think, I am sure rather, that it will have very fruitful outcomes, and all the participants will be getting something out of it. My personal experience of attending hundreds of physical conferences, seminars, and symposia over the almost last 4.5 decades, I think I can't point out even a single event in which I could not learn anything. In all seminars, we get some knowledge, and this is a great opportunity always for the participant to learn what is happening in other parts of the country, or other part of the society, and what others are thinking, and how to collaborate, and how get ideas of new ideas we get. And so it is always important. I wish it a grand success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure listening to you, and we received guidance regarding the direction of literature. Particularly, you warned against the inflammatory effect of literature and glorification of wrong things. And yes, recently, a large amount of pulp literature is being created that is not mainstream literature. And even in mainstream literature, something goes which should not be normally accepted. Thank you once again for your for sparing time for this conference and for your kind words, sir. As we know that, as T.S. Eliot had said, that art never improves, but the material of art is never quite the same. And therefore, tradition and change are quite inevitable in the progress of anything, including literature. We are going to discuss the changes that are taking place in the form and thematic pattern of literature in the recent time. We are lucky to have with us as the keynote speaker of our web conference, Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh, who is a person par excellence. Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh is DLIT and is UGC Emeritus Professor and former Head Department of English Studies and Research, Agra College, Agra. He has been Senior Fulbright Fellow at the University of Washington, Seattle, USA during 2003-4. He is the author of 14 widely acclaimed books, of many of which have been acquired by the British Museum Library and the US Library of Congress. Beyond Boundaries, Reflections of Indian and US Scholars, 2007. Multicultural America, Conversations with Contemporary Authors, 2005. The Calculus of Power, Modern American Political Novel, 1997. His most recent works include Gandhi and his Soul Force Mission, 2013. Rabindranath Tagore, The Living Presence, 2011. Shaping Minds, Multicultural Literature, 2010. W. H. Auden, Therapeutic Fountain, 2010. Erasing Barricades, Women in Indian Literature, 2010. And Perspective on Legends of American Theatre, 2009. He has published a monograph on August Wilson's The Piano Lesson and has edited two poetry anthologies, Poetic Miscellany and Spectrum of Poetic Sensibility. An eminent scholar and critic of American, British, and post-colonial literature, Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh has published over 180 articles and scholarly essays on various political, socio-cultural, and feminist issues in prestigious national and international journals. He has designed lessons on Virginia Woolf, Francis Bacon, and Charles Lamb for the Indira Gandhi National Open University, IGNOU, New Delhi. It is significant that his essay entitled The Spiritual Nationalism of Sri Aurobindo is prescribed in the foundation course of universities and colleges in Madhya Pradesh. Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh is on the review panel of Multi-Ethnic Literature of the United States, published by the University of Connecticut, Glenbrook, USA, and the African American Review, the quarterly international journal on Black American literature and culture of the Modern Language Association, published by the Johns Hopkins University Press, Baltimore, Maryland, USA. During 1992-96, Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh was the executive member of the Board of Directors of American Studies Research Center in Hyderabad. He has given extensive lectures and keynote addresses at many university campuses in India and abroad. He was the anchor of NUSSD, National University Student Skill Development Program, under the aegis of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS, Mumbai, PMO Office, New Delhi, and Ministry of Youth and Sports Affairs, New Delhi from 2013 to 2016. An associate of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Simla, he is the chief editor of Remarkings, an international biennial journal of research in English that is 19-year publication. Besides this, Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh is a man who thinks differently, and we will listen to him today. Over to Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh.
Thank you very much, Can you hear me?
Yes,
Am I
sir.
audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bhavesh Pandey, for being so generous in introducing me. Professor Ranjit Kumar Verma, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Munger University, who made such an impressive speech, which probably would give us a lot of food for thought while we are getting through the conference. Distinguished members of the Department of English, Munger University, worthy speakers, participants from various parts of the country and from other nations. Ladies and gentlemen, I warmly greet you and welcome you from the city of the Taj to this wonderful conference organized by Munger University. Friends, whenever I'm required to talk to an audience for a fairly long time, like 60 minutes, I always like to begin with a prayer and a warning, which I take from Stephen Leacock. And this is what Leacock says. Most men tire of a lecture in 10 minutes. Clever people can do it in 5. Sensible people never go to lectures at all. Well, friends, I appreciate the patience and the fortitude of all the participants, some of them who may like to be with me till the end of the talk. Friends, when Dr. Bhavesh Pandey broached this idea of the conference, I was thinking that when we talk of contemporary trends, what should I keep as the focus of the talk? And I finally decided on the topic that you have been informed about, anxiety of influence in the groves of academe, ruminations on contemporary trends in literature. Just to acquaint you with the title, groves of academe is a phrase which has been used by the Roman poet Horace in his epistles, where he said, "Seek for truth in the groves of academe." The Academia was a grove near ancient Athens, where a number of philosophers like Plato taught their pupils. Friends, The Groves of Academe is also the title of a novel by Mary McCarthy, first published in 1952 in the Joseph McCarthy era, and it is a pointed satire of the world of higher education. So when I'll be talking about the groves of academe, I'll be talking about the groves of higher education, basically, and what goes on in the groves of academe. Anxiety of influence, which is a part of the title of my talk, is a type of literary criticism established by Harold Bloom in 1973 in his book, The Anxiety of Influence, A Theory of Poetry. And in that he states, only strong poets can overcome this anxiety of influence. Lesser lights become derivative flatterers and never achieve poetic immortality for themselves. I really appreciate Professor Ranjit Verma's reference to Lolita and the Illustrated Weekly of India, and how he used the scientific temper to say what we should be on guard against. Friends, writers, poets who create literature, readers who read literature, teachers who teach literature. What I would like to talk on is taking the term of Harold Bloom, but I will not be using it exhaustively to mean the how lesser poets and stronger poets. Writers and poets, as I've said, have never been taken very seriously right from the beginning of time. If you are aware of the Republic created by Plato, you will see that in Plato's Republic, the poets and writers are out of bounds. The reason? Plato says that these writers and poets, they are passionate, they are emotional, and any society that is based on passion and emotion can never be a successful society. And the Greek civilization, which boasts on the primacy of reason over everything else, that was the same Greek society which gave a cup of hemlock to Socrates just because he was encouraging youngsters to ask questions. Coming from Plato to a very recent, in the 20th century, I'll give an example to show how non-serious attitude is always taken towards writers and poets. Once W.H. Auden was questioned by the immigrant official when he was showing his papers in Germany. And when the officer asked Auden his name, he gave his name, Mr. Hugh Auden. He said, "What is your profession?" Auden said, "I am a poet." The immigrant officials stopped for a moment and said, "Gentleman, I'm asking you, what is your profession?" He repeated, "I am a poet." And then this immigrant official got very irritated. He's telling you are repeating, "I am a poet, I am a poet." I'm asking you, what is your profession? What do you do for living? What do you do, basically? And then Auden got equally flustered. And he said that in order to get away from this irritating immigrant official, he said, "Oh, you mean profession? I'm a medieval historian." "Oh," he said, "medieval, please." So coming back from this, the point which is very important, and I think it has been touched very delicately by Professor Ranjit Verma, I feel that if we go back to time and we go to the medieval ages, it was a dark period in literature, it was a dark period in society. Civilization was just shrouded by darkness. And then came the Renaissance. And what happened during the Renaissance? That after the fall of Constantinople, when scholars carried the manuscripts to Rome and other places in various parts of the world, the Renaissance came. But what is Renaissance? We all know as students of literature that Renaissance is something which brought the revival of classical literature and diffused by the art of printing. When I was a student, and I have been a science student, and later, obviously, I switched off to this literature because of my passion for reading. I was very curious that merely carrying a number of books to some other countries, it doesn't create an awakening. Why was the emphasis on saving those classical Greek literature? And then with some study, it dawned on me that Renaissance, one of the most important factors why classical literature became important was, unlike the medieval times, after which came the Renaissance, it was, and which was a God-centered universe where people were being exploited blatantly, and only the church and the king and the nobles and the barons were having the lovely time of their life. When we go back to the Greek literature, we find it is very significant. Maybe if you have read Sophocles, Aeschylus, and anyone for that matter, you will see that it was a man-centered universe. The gods made prophecies, the gods played a very important role, but it was man-centered. When we look at a tragedy like Oedipus Rex, we see what a man is capable of doing. So basically, you will find that what is very paramount in literature is the idea of what we call in a broad term humanism. And what is humanism? Just to be concerned about man. Shakespeare says, what a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, and in apprehension like an angel. Now, when you see, similarly, Shakespeare, when he talks about the poet, he says the poet's eye in a fine frenzy rolling and all that. And he says that the poet's pen turns them to shape and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. And moving from there, if we think of how important an influence can be and how we can come to terms with the anxiety of influence. And anxiety of influence is what has happened before. The tradition, as even Eliot would refer to that, I'll come to Eliot later on. The greatest epic writers were Homer and Virgil. Milton wrote an epic. The influence of the epic writers are always there. Anybody who writes an epic cannot be unaware of, at that point of time, couldn't have been unaware of either Odyssey, Iliad, or Aeneid. Milton writes an epic based on the Bible, but he has the audacity and the daring to even emphasize that even a religious text is open to question. And how does he make it open to question? By creating Satan. When we were talking about Lolita, when we heard about Lolita, this was, you see, it was what Milton was doing was far more dangerous. At a time when Bible and the church were all important, he had the courage to challenge the orthodoxy, the rituals, and he brought Satan to It was not that he was glorifying evil in the form of Satan, but he brought in another story, anticipating the biblical story where Satan and God have been in conflict. Then we come to a poet like Shelley. We are all aware of a statement which he made, which we have been studying right from our student days, that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Unacknowledged because when the poet says something, nobody cares to listen. But when in the course of time, after generations have gone by, the lines are picked up, they are repeated, and they are brought into the general consciousness in the mainstream. And to support what what Shelley said, we come to his beautiful poem Skylark, where in one particular stanza, he says, he makes an analogy of the skylark. He says, like a poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden, till the world is wrought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. This is what a poet is capable of doing. He can bring the world wrought to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not when he was singing. In a similar vein, it was Keats, who died very young, who knew even then that none can usurp the heights but those to whom the miseries of the world are miseries and will not let them rest. If you are a writer, and if the miseries of the world do not allow you to rest, you are going to be a source of transformation. And this is what Keats says in Hyperion. Similarly, when we talk about Shakespeare, why is Shakespeare so popular? Is it because of the power of the British imperialist forces? No. If you open the first line, if you go to the first line of Preface to Shakespeare by Dr. Samuel Johnson, he states, nothing pleases long and pleases many, but the just representation of general nature. Just representation. If you are faithful to the representation of what is essentially human nature, then you will last forever. You'll become universal. Similarly, we see how poets bring in change. I will refer to a poem which made Thomas Gray immortal, his elegy written in a country churchyard. In one of the stanzas, he says, let not ambition mock their useful toil, their homely joys and destiny obscure, nor grandeur hear with a disdainful smile the short and simple annals of the poor. It's a beautiful poem. These lines are simply magical, but what is very important? What is Gray doing? Gray, with the composition of these lines, he brought in a revolutionary change by asserting that hitherto literature had to be and could be only written about those who were in renown, those who were famous, those who were kings and queens and princes and generals, but literature cannot be written about common folks. And this is how a great writer who can ward off the anxiety of influence. This is an influence that you cannot write great literature. You cannot have a tragic hero who is not a man of renown. And Gray's small poem is the beginning of whatever you read anything, where you read anything in the modern times, you will find that even a migrant labor can be a man who's a kind of a tragic hero. Now, similarly, when we come to the Victorian era, if you look at the Ulysses by Tennyson, where he ends by saying, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. This is another of the responsibilities which probably a writer shoulders, a great writer shoulders. And similarly, like Browning, who would say that God is in his heaven, all is right with the world. But literature, not only in terms of content, but in terms of technique, they undergo changes. When Eliot published his love song of Alfred Prufrock, and at the very beginning, he said, let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient ether rised upon a table. A patient ether rised upon a table. Is this poetry? F.R. Lewis had asked. Now the point is, this is how one great poet counters the anxiety of influence. And where Prufrock says, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. Coffee spoon becomes an image. It could never have been dreamt of till the Victorian times. T.S. Eliot, very much mindful of the disillusionment that came after the First World War, he wrote The Wasteland. And The Wasteland tells you that everything is barren, everything is sterile, everything is waste and in decay. But when he ends the poem, he uses 3 words, Datta, Dayadvam, and Damyata. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And what do the 3 words mean? Datta means to give. Dayadvam means to be compassionate. And Damyata is self-control, which again is one of the ingredients of great literature. Now, what I would like to again go back to this example of Lolita. We are not debating on the artistic merit of the work, but when I read extensively about the writer and saw it in comparison with the content of the novel, I was quite amazed. Nabokov had one of the most successful marriages. He was the one who was most dutiful towards his family. And yet, if you look at his creation, you will not find anything common between the man who wrote and the work he created. What I'm trying to emphasize is we should be cautious, we were told, yes. When I first picked up the Lady Chatterley's Lover, which is a very controversial novel, which has been accused of vulgarity, was banned on the grounds of decency and all that. And trial of Lady Chatterley went on for ages. When I picked up the novel, I looked at the cover, and the portrayal of nudity on the cover, maybe it could have been something which would have attracted most people. I just shifted the cover, and what I read in the opening lines of the novel, I assure you that I can never forget the change that I felt within me. Because even before picking up the novel, I knew that it was a controversial novel, it was a vulgar novel and all that. But when I opened the first page and saw how Lawrence began with, and this is what he says at the beginning of the novel, ours is most essentially a tragic age, so we refuse to take it tragically. The cataclysm has happened. We are among the ruins. We build up new habitats, have new little hopes. We scramble or go around. We have got to live no matter how many skies have fallen. And I think today, all those youngsters who have committed suicides for God knows what reasons, had they, in that moment of turmoil, read this of Lawrence, we have got to live no matter how many skies have fallen, I think many would have been with us today. Now, what happened after the Second World War? And this is where I'm coming to the crux of my presentation. After the Second World War, we saw despair everywhere, nihilism, everything dead. The novel was dead, the author was dead, and God was dead. And movements sprang up from the quietism of despair. Communism evolved. That was in 30s, obviously. Feminism, civil rights, black art, margins, etc., and all that. Those movements also were a part of it. But what actually, why I want to emphasize here by using the term anxiety of influence, I just gave you an example of how the writers from Aeschylus to Eliot have contented with this anxiety of influence, and then what happened. And this, everyone here who is a part of the groves of Indian academe, I wish to now address those people. And where the anxiety of influence, which had an adverse effect on our psyche, we first saw during this period a proliferation of theories in the groves of academe, theories which were obscure, complex, not rooted in literary and humanistic studies. We became aware of terms modernism, colonialism, structuralism, postmodernism, post-structuralism, post-feminism, post-colonialism, Orientalism, Occidentalism, eco-criticism, and now post-truth. And then we came through an army of people: Barthes, Foucault, Derrida, Schopenhauer, Saussure, Heidegger, so on and so forth. And how this, why I call this an adverse kind of an effect, it is, this is not my personal judgment alone. I'll refer you to Terry Eagleton's book, Literary Theory and Introduction, which he published in 1983. And he said that most of the theories are so arcane, so obscure, that they almost look like nuclear physics. And literary theory gets in between the reader and the work. And he made it very apparent that what my purpose in this book is to make modern literary theory intelligible and attractive to as wide a readership as possible. The anxiety of influence that I was referring to, the more insidious kind of a thing, we have all heard about Gayatri's, Spivak, Chakravarti's, Can the Subaltern Speak? And any academician or scholar, what the name, if it's talking about marginalization, will talk about this essay. And I call this a fallacy, not because this theory, what she's trying to propound in that is not significant, but these are her own words. She says in the introduction to Draupadi, my approach to the story has been influenced by deconstructive practice. I clearly share an unease that would declare avant-garde theories of interpretation too elitist to cope with revolutionary feminist material. But we have learned in the groves of academe that you don't have to explain anything, you don't have to understand anything, but you use big names, big concepts, big ideas that will give you the impression that great scholars are around. We talk about eco-criticism. And whenever we talk of eco-criticism, whether it is in seminars or conferences or discussion, we are told that all this idea of eco-criticism comes from the eco-criticism reader, Landmarks in Literary Ecology, published in 1996 by Cheryl Lotfelty and others. And William Rocket was the one who gave us this term. But friends, what I say that we scholars, the young scholars especially, the young writers especially, is that we should not restrict our minds and create a mental block that if we have to say anything on eco-criticism, we begin with 1996. What about the book that Rousseau wrote in 1762, The Social Contract, which begins with man is born free, but everywhere he's in chains. And he suggests that we go back to nature if we wish to. And you see, it is books like that, not the eco-criticism reader, which gives you the perspective. And if you look at the 2015 conclave in Paris on world climate change, you will see how such books make an impact. And rather than go into this, go to the Chipko movement. Few ladies, a widow, led by a widow, they hug the tree and they say that if anybody has to cut the trees, it will be after you kill us. This is what eco-criticism should be all about. Then some of the dangerous trends that have crept in say post-70s, and mostly during the 80s and onwards, it became a trend in American universities and many other places too, that they started having a creative writing program. So if you wanted to be a writer, you need a training as writer. I don't know whether from Aeschylus to anyone for that matter whose books you have loved, they had been to any writing school, because I fundamentally believe that creative writing is something which probably nobody can teach you. It can give you some discipline and others. Now, another thing which I wish to bring to your notice is the Syndicate of Publishers. When R.K. Narayan wrote Swami and Friends, and he was looking for a publisher in England and America, he had 27 rejection slips. And he wanted to throw his manuscript into the Thames and forget about his writing. But what do you see today? You see all the world's publishers. They have set up their offices in India. And the land of the snake charmers has literally been converted into the land of writers. And what happens? And then another thing that you would like to see is the prizes, the Booker Prize. Satanic Verses gets a Booker. The God of Small Things gets a Booker. The White Tiger gets a Booker. I leave it free without making any comment on what you think of these books in terms of how they forward the idea of humanism that we have been talking about. And it is very strange today that any writer, and another thing, if you have to publish anything in America, England, France, or anything, you cannot just go to a publisher and offer him your manuscript. You have to look for an agent. And an agent will decide whether your manuscript needs to be considered or not. And he is a go-between the author and the publisher. And you see what happens. When you have this kind of a chain, you find that it is a very insidious kind of a market psychology that is working. And when the novel is published, you come to see, you look at Satanic Verses. In less than a month's time, Salman Rushdie got $2 million for writing Satanic Verses. I don't grudge. I'm a fan of Salman Rushdie, like books like The Moor's Last Sigh and Midnight Children, everything. I love those books. But Satanic Verses? When Satanic Verses was banned, Salman Rushdie wrote an open letter to Rajiv Gandhi, and he said that the freedom of expression was being curtailed. And then what happens? I was in Hyderabad that time. I managed to get a copy of the Satanic Verses, and we, number of friends, we took it by turn, and I thought it was extremely excruciating to go beyond a few pages. You don't enjoy reading a book, and even if we sell 60 million copies, it shouldn't matter to me. It didn't matter. And in the post-digitization, you will see that it's a very strange kind of a phenomenon is taking place. When digitization came in the area of public publication, we all were wary that now nobody will probably be using a book. But see the paradox. There are no readers, but the publication industry has flourished to such an extent that is almost 30% increase in the books that are coming out every day. So there are no readers, but there are lots and lots of books. This is again an anxiety of influence that, okay, I should have a book. I had, about a month ago, been invited in one of the programs that we have in the city by the name of English Literary Society of Agra. And a friend called me. He said, do you mind coming for a few minutes? I said, what am I supposed to do there? He says, you have to launch a book written by an engineering graduate. I said, but why are you calling me? He says, no, I think because he feels that you should come and launch this book. Anyway, I went and I asked this boy, before I say something, would you like to say on the mic what inspired you to write this novel, this first novel? And you know what he said? He said, sir, I was a student of engineering, and one day I was lying in the hostel room, and I suddenly thought, if Chetan Bhagat can write a novel, why can't I? So you're caught between Satanic Verses on one hand and Chetan Bhagat on the other. And I would like to share a statement which Arthur Schopenhauer made and which is very relevant is, the person who writes for fools is always sure of a large audience. So writers, beware. I will now come to Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. I do not want to make any comments on magic realism or anything. I don't know. All of you present here may have a copy of this book in your shelves. But I would be totally surprised if even 5 can tell me, oh, I enjoyed the book from first line to last. The point I'm trying to make is, I'm sharing a quote from The God of Small Things. And like Lily Chatterley's lover quote, this is again a quote which I've never been able to forget since I read it first time. And you see what she says? She says the secret of the great stories is that they have no secrets. The great stories are the ones you have heard and want to hear again. You know how they end, yet you listen as though you don't. In the great stories, you know who lives, who dies, who finds love, who doesn't, and yet you want to know again. I'm sure if Arundhati keeps on reading these lines written by her, maybe she will give us a novel which we would love from the first to the last word. And this is not something which Arundhati Roy is aware. Raja Rao, in his preface to Kantapura, he talks of Sthalas Purana. He talks of the grandmother's tales. And to make it more familiar to you, allow me to use a few lines by Sudarshan Fakir in a ghazal, which is very popular. The lines go, मोहल्ले की सबसे निशानी पुरानी, वो बुढ़िया जिसे बच्चे कहते थे नानी, वो नानी की बातों में परियों का डेरा, वो चेहरे की झुर्रियों में सदियों का फेरा, भुलाए नहीं भूल सकता है कोई, वो छोटी सी रातें, वो लंबी कहानी. What we are all looking for always is what all these have said. वो छोटी सी रातें, वो लंबी कहानी, the story. Now, when you see that when we all writers are engaged in writing and bringing out the best that is in us, we are relentlessly engaged in questioning the status quo in the public domain. George Orwell wrote 2 novels, Animal Farm and 1984. And they have become classics, which not people go by how many million copies they sold. But everyone who is aware in the modern context, they know what 1984 signifies and what is the significance of Animal Farm. And what one has to be very much aware is all these anxiety of influences that come. And we see this, I mean, all the youngsters who are a part of this conference today may have seen how the groves of academe, one has to be very cautious. And when you are thinking of whether writing a research paper, reading, you must basically understand that these stories that we have just been talking about, you have, if you go to all the world literature, go without any boundaries, without any distinction. Search for the stories. There could be just one short paragraph that can change your life. Read, extend the horizon of your mind. Don't be curtailed by what this professor said and what that critic said. What is their requirement? If for passing an exam, that's all fine. Do what they're saying and buy those Bazaar notes and get rid of them. But when you are trying to be the part of the change that you wish to see, then you have to be aware. Increase your reading, increase your intertextual connectivity. And basically, whether it is you're talking about all the things that are happening today, you will have to keep in mind the changes that are coming. And these changes have been a part of the human civilization. So when you are what you're trying to create, you must be aware of the fact that we have to consider no longer the symbolic powers that arise, but powers that bridge cultures to negotiate the sadness of calamities created by man himself, cultures that renew man's faith in democracy and universal brotherhood. Now, I'll just to give you an idea of the contemporary trends, in 2017, Remarkings brought out a special number called A World Assembly of Poets. And in this, we got the contribution of 85 eminent writers from all the 5 continents and from 58 countries. There are certain poems, short poems, which I would like to share with you, and which I'm sure if you listen carefully, you will love. We are having trouble with Pakistan. We are having trouble with China. I'll begin with a few lines of a poem. And the title of the poem is by a Pakistani women writer. And the title of the poem is Amendment in the 12th Amendment by Kushwan Singh. To get rid of this plague of nudity spread all around, I requested the oppressors of my times that the custom of burying girls as soon as we are born be made part of the Shariat bill. What courage. This is a poem. The next one that I'm reading is by Walter Hoelbling from Graz, Austria. The title of the poem is Poetry in the Time of Refugees. He says, how do I write about the beauty of the world when barefoot people pass before my window in search of shelter? How do I share my pleasure of the birds' sweet song at dawn when I see faces etched with panic from the deafening blast of bombs? How to rejoice in love and friendship when meeting people who could barely save their lives after burying their loved ones? How can I write with passion of the kindness of the human heart when I see thousands fleeing from the ruins of their homes only to face police walls and barbed wire? This is a poem rooted in the times, but I will share with a short poem about you, which on the one hand, you have the higher kind of going to a higher altitude and looking at the environment. And then, like the Keats's Nightingale, you have to sing a song which touches you, first of all. And the poem is titled Not About You. This poem is not about you. Even though your spirit is in every word, your voice sounds strong in the halls of my mind, telling me things I'm now sure I want to know. This poem is about me trying to understand you. And friends, before I conclude, I would like to tell my young friends here, remember what Socrates said. An unexamined life is not worth living. So when you're studying, when you're teaching, when you're researching, see whether you are examining a life. And the other advice I would like to share with my young friends here is a statement by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where he says, our lives begin to end the day, we become silent about things that matter. So challenge the status quo. Don't get into an unnecessary kind of conflict in the name of freedom of expression. Because when you talk about the freedom of expression, I want to remind you what A.G. Gardner says, that liberty is not a personal affair only. It is a social contract. It is an accommodation of interest. And keeping this in mind, work for your own good and at the same time, work for the good of all. And with these words, first of all, I wish to thank Munger University, the Vice Chancellor, particularly my friend Dr. Bhavesh Pandey, who told you that I would be talking to you in a different vein. And if you're happy, thank him. If you're not happy, then catch hold of him. And I wish this conference grand success. And I feel very honored to be a part of this majestic event. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, sir. All present, you have listened to Professor Nivir Kumar Ghosh, and I would like to thank sir for his very comprehensive presentation. You know, Dr. Johnson had said about William Shakespeare that the greatness lies in who pleases many and pleases long. And by that yardstick, I think Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh has pleased all of us and pleased long. And as he started his lecture on with a note that lectures generally do not attract many people for more than 10 minutes, but our experience is that we were enjoying him till the end, and we even feel thirsty. In his very comprehensive presentation, Professor Ghosh made a survey right from Aeschylus to Eliot, and he talked about Horace, he talked about Plato, Socrates, Eliot, Milton, Lawrence, Nabokov, Shakespeare, Gray, Shelley, Arundhati, Raja Rao, and many others. And he also talked about the recent influences, the Syndicate of Publishers, or the prize influence, and how creative writing has ceased to be creative in many sense, how creative writing is being guided by different types of critical theories. So we should be great literature, according to Professor Ghosh, cannot be and should not be guided by critical principles. Of course, critical principles apply, but those who have been great have hardly written only following critical principles, as today the Syndicate of Publishers are doing. So I think we should be. I'm very thankful to Professor Nibir Kumar Ghosh, who has accepted my invitation and made a very wonderful presentation. Now we come to the end of this.
Thank you so much, Pandit.
And now I request Dr. Tausif Mohsin to propose a vote of thanks for this session. Dr. Tausif Mohsin.
Sir, Pandey sir, we can expect some questions from sir.
Okay. If there are any questions, Dr. Tausif, let us take some questions first. If there are some questions, please, Anindya, if you have noted some questions. Yes, we have a question. So, Soumya Sokarja Ghoshal. Is there a crisis in criticism in the contemporary period if we go by Alec West's words? Is there a crisis in criticism in contemporary period if we go by Alec West's words? Sir, this is a question for you.
Well, that's an interesting question. When we talk about is there a crisis? Crisis is something which should be there, because crisis is something which creates the tension and which makes us think. If there is no crisis, it would be just a society where a big brother is watching you. That's all. All the CCTVs will do the work. So when you talk about a crisis, basically the crisis is related, number one, to the autonomy of the powers that be, who create these centers in the name of theory. It is a crisis if you impose those theories. Because when I'm sure, when T.S. Eliot or Matthew Arnold or Dr. Johnson or Aristotle, they wrote their criticism, there was no authority which was probably putting them in the syllabus and they said, you have to read this. Okay, one instruction from HRD and they come in the syllabus and all that. It was not that. You should be left free. If there is a crisis, don't bother about a crisis. If you want to, don't get into it, because today you are flooded with so many choices that you will never know what the crisis is. It would be as difficult to explain as COVID-19 symptoms. It can be asymptomatic, it can be symptomatic. So what I'm saying is, if there is a crisis, let the crisis be there. Read what your text tells you to enhance your open vision. Don't read just because it is the trend, it is the fashion, because fashion and trends, they never remain the same. Great people come and the fashions, they are changed. I hope I've answered your question.
Any other question? Yes. Another question is Visakha Devi.
Vishakha Devi says, are writers promoted by the politics of publications or by the power of writing alone?
Yeah.
Vishakha, if somebody paid you $2 million in advance, would you ask him this question? If you say, I'll give you an example. You've heard about diaspora. And the whole of the country, the academia particularly, they are now busy in bringing anthologies, writing articles on diaspora. You cannot count 5 names on your fingers who have made a positive contribution to diaspora. They're all talking about Draupadi. They're talking about middle class people who have were in Calcutta and then they go to America and then they say, oh, this is an imaginary homeland and all that. So when you have to sell a book in America, what does sell in America? That is for you to find out. It is the politics of publication, because the agent will tell you that this manuscript, can you name one book which has become a bestseller and sold 5 million copies in America, which was based on a person like the creators? Do you, if you write a book about the woman who made the Chipko movement famous, it won't sell 2 copies in America. So it is not only the publication, the power of, and when we were in America, basically, their idea of India then, their idea of India is changing because all the publishers have come. But look at the publication and look at the writers of the publication. and you will see for yourself whether the politics of publication is dominating this, and you're writing alone. And what is writing alone? I'll give you an example. If you have read A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, he tells you the pain of writing. He says that a writer must be like an eagle who will soar high into the sky and will observe things from that distance. So isolation is one of the things which a writer, but today a writer will have book readings in all the places of the world. The writer will give book readings in cruises, 21 days tour of the cruises, and in those you will be in that kind of a luxury. But as I told you, Schopenhauer's example, that only when you write about for fools, you will have a large audience. So the politics of publications are there, but those who have been able to contend with the anxiety of influence of the politics of publication, when they write a book, I'll give you an example. And I don't just one example, anyone, and I'm giving you this example because I want many of you to read that book. This is a book titled Mohandas by Uday Prakash. In one short reading, you will do that. Read that book. I don't think there is no politics of publication there. But as I told you, read Mohandas and read some of the books that I mentioned. I don't want to name them again, and you will know the difference. And, Dr. Samuel Johnson said that the great work of art must create its own audience. So any budding writer, if he or she is present here, I will say have the courage to stand alone, to write what you feel is right, and you are able to speak about things that matter to you and to the rest of the world. How can we find a middle ground between critical theoretical approaches and humanistic approaches to literature? How can we go past the mental block of literary theory when addressing a text? One thing I must congratulate Dr. Bhavesh Pandey for the quality of the participants. And what is really shocking me is that so many of them have been listening to what I was saying. Now, when you look at this, when I try to answer this question, you are on the lookout for a middle ground. When you look at the critical or theoretical approaches and humanistic approaches, we are talking about the mental block. Who is addressed? Who is creating this mental block? Number one, it is we. Because we don't want to read on our own and find out. If you read, and I'll give you a very powerful example. T.S. Eliot in Tradition and Individual Talent, when he talks about the greatness of a writer who also enjoys the escape from personality, he says that this is the poet's mind must be like the platinum wire, and which changes a chemical reaction without itself taking part in that chemical reaction like a catalyst. So what we have to do is, if the mental block is there, the only way we can free ourselves from the mental block is widen our reading. And because even if you go to Google, because what I've told you, if you look at, you will not find in one place, And what I have shared with you today, and why I emphasize that this is something that you would really feel enlightened to do, is I have not said a single word which I've read as how one reads literature. I've shared with you my experience as a teacher, my experience as a student, my experience as a scholar of literature, my experience as a writer, my experience as a critic, my experience as an editor. And these are the problems which I've discovered on my own that I've shared with you. So when we don't have to when you talk of a middle ground, the middle ground is read the, one more example I'll give you. If you have this prejudice in your mind that Lolita is a vulgar book and the person who wrote it must be a paranoid, then we are under a mental block. But if we read Lolita and see where such neuroticism comes from, you will find that it is a trait of the human beings. And maybe if books like Lolita would not have been written today, and you see the book has an impact. If you have read this book by reading Lolita in Tehran, for example, you will see that if you connect it with the present day thing, if you look at the Me Too controversies that were going on, it has given people the kind of a chance to come forward and share what they have undergone. So instead of searching for a middle path, you take a look at both the paths, the road not taken attitude, and then decide what is good for you and good for posterity. Would you agree that the contemporary critical theories do not restrict our thoughts, rather open up our minds for new ideas? Did I say this? That contemporary critical theories, we should be averse to them. If you don't read contemporary critical theories, but the important thing is, why are you reading them? Are you reading to write a paper? Are you reading to teach? Are you reading to talk in a seminar? Or if you are reading just for the heck of it. But I have given you an example from Mahashweta's on introduction to Draupadi. What I would say is, when I look at that end of the story of Draupadi, it's such a powerful story. And what is happening in that story? That this Draupadi, in the end, when she is brutally molested and raped by one and all in that establishment, she, instead of hiding her nudity, she challenges them. And when I think of this kind of a scene, I think, see, how far the mind of the writer has traveled. What a fantastic journey. The influence that was on us is Draupadi helplessly praying to Lord Krishna to clothe her. And here she does away with all those stereotypes. So when you look at, if I look at this example, I think my mind is opening up to new ideas. And it is irrespective of what, and I do not say it, I have not said that it has obstructed. It is the writer herself who she says that I've been influenced by deconstructive practices. So it depends on why you need it. But what I want to say is that open up our minds for new ideas. Open up our minds for new ideas. You can't go with a tabula rasa. You have to go with a lot of preparation. You have to have a rich background of reading behind you. Read anything. Read anything from any culture. Read anything from the scriptures or whatever you feel like. Read contemporary what is being written. But once your mind opens up, you will see that there is awakening, which neither contemporary critical theories nor anything else can rest of that. Can you kindly provide your views on creative criticism as is practiced by writers of our age? Creative criticism. Well, one of the things that I've not referred to and I don't want to refer to is when I talk about the groves of academia, and this as a writer, as an editor of remarkings, I've had to constantly face this problem. Now it has become almost customary, like the mask and the sanitizer in COVID, that every professor must also be a poet. And every poet must have audience. So I receive many such submissions where the worthy poet has asked his worthy students to write a long article on that collection, and it is sent for publication. Where I see that this is being done is what doesn't fall in the category of creative criticism. For example, what is creative criticism? You put a post, I published this book with the blessings of so and so and so and so. Dr. Pandey, do I have a minute? Well, I think it'll amuse you also a bit. There was once a Sahitya Academy award function where Dr. Venkataraman was presiding. Kushwan Singh was also a part of that panelists. So everybody who came, who received the prizes, they gave their own reasons. I was inspired by Saraswati, I was inspired by goddess, I was inspired by muses, and I was inspired. And after a few minutes, people could see that the whole audience on camera was sleeping. And then the organizers realized this, and they suddenly went and requested Kushwan Singh that you come and speak now. So Kushwan Singh came, and you know what he said? He said, for last half an hour, I've been listening to all the inspirations that these writers have received. But I don't think they are honest. I'll be honest. He said, I became a great writer because I took my inspiration from third-rate writers. And I thought, if they can write, why can't I? So to answer your question finally is that creative criticism as is practiced by writers of our age. Creative criticism not practiced by writers of our age, if they do it with a sense of responsibility, if they do it with a sense of increasing the value of the canon for which they are writing, I think I would certainly be with them. But I will not like to take anything for granted, let it be Salman Rushdie or any Nobel laureate or anything for that matter. Even it can be anyone. And examine life, I said. You examine it. If you feel the worth of it is there, do your reading. If you're convinced, again, you did not follow it because you must have your own standpoint. And if you have your own standpoint, if you give a proof of your own presence over there, I think you don't need anything else. Don't you think being too critical snatches the beauty of a work of art? Well, I think I must answer this question. Being too critical. How would you qualify too critical? If you are an artist, there have been many writers who have been their own critics. Ernest Hemingway, when he wrote The Old Man and the Sea, it is on record, you can check. He went through that novel, through the manuscript of the novel, 200 times. And what you see, the finished product, is that. If you say that if one is too critical, you snatch the beauty of a work of art. The beauty of the work of art, if it has beauty in it, like Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, nobody can snatch it away, whether you're critical or whether you're not critical. The work will stand on its own. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all you know on earth and all you need to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Anindya. I think now we should stop taking questions.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Anindya, now I think we should stop taking questions. And now over to Dr. Tausif for vote of thanks.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm extremely sorry for the inconvenience which was caused because of technicalities. Anyway, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Munger University, Munger, Professor Dr. Ranjit Kumar Verma, Distinguished Keynote Speaker, UGC Emeritus Professor and former Fulbright Fellow, Washington University, Washington, HOD of Washington University, Washington, Professor Dr. N.K. Ghosh, HOD of English, Indira Kala Sangeet University, Khairagarh, Professor Dr. I. Tiwari, Professor and former Dean Faculty of Arts, University of Calcutta, Dr. Sanjukta Das Gupta, HOD of English, TMBU Bhagalpur, Professor Dr. U.K. Bishra, Associate Professor and Inspector of Colleges, Munger University, Munger, Dr. B.C. Pandey. Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, it's a matter of immense pleasure for me to deliver the vote of thanks, first of all, to Professor Ranjit Kumar Verma, the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Munger University, Munger, for allowing us and supporting us to organize the national level e-conference on contemporary trends in literature. Sir, I am deeply beholden to you for honoring us all present here this great afternoon by delivering a wonderful welcome address and thus boosting our morale and building our confidence and assuring us that you are there amidst us and that we are moving in the right direction under your kind patronage. Thank you very much, sir, for your benign presence and a great welcome address. As they say, well begun is half done. With this off-quoted line of the Bard of Avon, I would like to take this opportunity to thank my scholarly, worthy, and amiable colleague, Dr. B.C. Pandey, the convener of the e-conference, for delivering a beautiful introductory speech and developing our interest right since the beginning, and thus assuring us throughout that the 3-day conference is really going to be a worthwhile and learning experience for all of us. And the last but not the least, in fact, the most important person of the day, I would take this honor to thank Professor Dibir Kumar Ghosh, the keynote speaker today, hence the fountainhead of literary knowledge and scholarship. Professor Ghosh is an epitome of learning and teaching. Dr. Pandey has already spoken at length about his charismatic personality in his introductory speech. Sir, I'm at a loss of words to express my gratitude to a person of such a grand stature, a man of intellectual integrity par excellence. Your scholarly lecture on anxiety of influence in the growths of academy, domination on contemporary traits in literature, was very illuminating and informative. Drawing upon the phrase of Harold Bloom, enunciated in his seminal theory of poetry, published in the book The Anxiety of Influence, A Theory of Poetry in 1973, you built upon the idea with jaw-dropping erudition. Bloom's book was perhaps the first book in a series of books that advanced a new revisionary or antithetical approach to literary criticism. Bloom's central thesis is that the poets are hindered in their creative process by the ambiguous relationship they necessarily maintain with precursor poets. Building upon the ideas of Bloom, you so creatively developed upon the topic that I am sure it must have inspired many participants today and picked and stirred the interest of many other inquisitive minds. It was indeed edifying to listen to your novel and seminal views on the topic. Thank you very much, sir. We look forward to listening to your scholarly lecture in future too. We would give it a miss if we do not record our indebtedness to Professor Dr. I.D. Tiwari, Professor and Head of the Department of English, Indira Kala Sangeet University, Khairagarh, Chhattisgarh, Professor Dr. Shakunta Das Gupta, former Dean, Faculty of Arts, University of Kolkata, and Professor U.K. Mishra, HOD of English, TMBU Bhagalpur. I express my heartfelt thanks to all the three highly rated academicians and scholars of great repute for their mere presence on the inaugural session of e-conference has done a great wonder. I would be failing in my duty if I do not express my heartfelt gratitude to the attendees without whom the seminars and conferences have no relevance. Thank you for connecting with us. Besides all the organizers, particularly Professor Anindya, Professor Shafe Danish, Professor Priyaranjan Tiwari, Professor Rimpi Sarkar, Professor Ajay Kumar, Dr. Abhimanyu, and many others, to name a few, and the intellectual and the technical staff, namely Abhishek of the e-conference, deserve special commendation for their dexterity and diligence. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Please stay home and stay safe. Now over to Dr. B.C. Pandey for the rest of the proceeding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tausif, for proposing the vote of thanks. And with this, we come to the end of this session. We'll be starting the next session shortly after a break. And in the next session, we are going to listen Professor Sanjukta Das Gupta, former Dean, Faculty of Arts, University of Calcutta. Anindya, now let us break and we will resume after some time. Over to Anindya.
Thank you, sir. We end our session.